Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for coming to this session. My name is Krug. I am a principal architect at Couchbase. I've been with Couchbase for about 8 years. My 8-year anniversary was June 1st, so about a week and a half ago. Originally out of California, so I don't have a British accent, but I've been here living in London for about 5 years now. The talk today, as an introduction to the data platform, I'm going to do my best to cover 8 years worth of material into about 30 minutes. So bear with me if I speak a little bit quickly. This will be a whirlwind tour of everything that I can get at you. Probably will use all of the time, so I'd appreciate it if you keep your questions for the last 1 minute that I've reserved for that. But I will be around all day if you have other questions, and I'm happy to speak with you. Again, as an introduction to the data platform, I expect a number of you in the room are new to Couchbase, maybe have been using Couchbase for a while and want to pick up some of the new capabilities and new features. I won't be able to go into super depth with everything, but want to give you a picture of what the platform has to offer and how to get started. You'll see a lot of stuff repeated from the keynote from Ravi and Scott. You'll see a lot of stuff kind of repeated throughout the day. That's kind of on purpose because there's a ton of material to absorb. Everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different way of learning about it, a different way of looking at it, a different language of talking about it. So take the repetition opportunity to really absorb and get your own understanding of what Couchbase means to you. Okay, so I'll go through some very quick marketing stuff just to set the stage again, similar to what we saw in the keynote earlier. The biggest shift and the biggest thing that Couchbase is focused on is this explosion of the interactions, all of the searches, all of the logins, all of the lookups, all of the likes, all of the browsing, all of the recommendations, all of the saving of profiles, the saving of data, the saving of information. All of those are interactions with these digital services, either that you're using as an employee of your company, that you're building for your employees, or that you are delivering or using to your end consumers. And it's that explosion of activity, the interactions, that we're so focused on. And the other point that's really important is consumers, users, customers, the end users of these services are what are driving the expectations. We've all been spoiled by Facebook and Google and Amazon into thinking that all of our lives be that easy. We should be able to find what we want instantly. We should be able to have access to it offline. These services should tell us what we want and tell us who we should be friends with. And so we are the ones now setting those expectations for our banks and for our insurance companies and for our healthcare providers and for our governments. And it's that feature-rich, personalized, fast, and available access to their services and to their data that is now become a ubiquitous expectation. And again, what Couchbase is here to allow you to create. Okay, that's it for the marketing, I promise. When we start talking about the Couchbase Data Platform, and Ravi touched on a lot of this, Scott touched on a lot of this, there's been a couple core concepts that have really driven us from the very beginning, from 8 years ago or so when I joined. Really focusing on clustering first. And up here I have true auto sharding, but it goes beyond that. It goes into building a clustered, distributed, replicated, sharded system from the very beginning. Not creating something of a single node and then bolting on afterwards. Making sure we have a very flexible data access pattern. I'll talk much more about this, but using JSON as our native data model and supporting others as we go forward. Memory first is a really important part. It doesn't mean in memory, and it doesn't mean memory only, and it doesn't mean your whole data set must fit in RAM. It can, but it doesn't have to. But memory first means all of your access to the data, whether it be writing or reading, is going to go through RAM. And all of our replication and internal access and internal management is done through RAM. RAM to network speeds allow us to move data, to replicate data, to give you access to data very, very quickly. Making sure everything is asynchronous. That's a really internal thing, but it also affects kind of how you interact with it. And then isolating workloads. And we'll talk about this a little more, but Ravi and Scott highlighted that being able to run complex analytical queries on separate hardware, separate processes, separate instances, separate VMs, whatever your infrastructure is, separate from your hundreds of thousands, millions, or just tens of operations per second running your operational and transactional workload, and being able to keep those, but also other ones separate, not as a requirement, but as a capability. So you don't have to be distributed. You don't have to have all of your workload isolated and distributed, but you have the ability to do that when you need to. So we'll go through that in a little bit more depth. And then we have the Couchbase Data Platform. And this is our kind of architecture, pulling everything together. I'm not going to go through all of the pieces. Ravi went through it pretty well, but it's that core of a memory-first, replicated, persistent database layer that we then wrap everything around, and we wrap different access patterns and different indexing capabilities. And we try as best we can to keep the data stored in one place on a set of nodes that we'll see, without having to move it out to different technologies or out to different systems. And then all of the access and indexing and query patterns are off of that. And then, again, wrapped around with some of the kind of core capabilities of infrastructure, being infrastructure agnostic, being cloud agnostic, having a single API and programming language to get into the platform, so you don't have to worry about which node am I talking to, or which query am I running, which port am I accessing. All of that's abstracted from a developer perspective. Sorry, just taking the platform a second, that top left corner in orange, the mobile and IoT, that has a special meaning to us. And there's a reason that it's here as part of the platform, because we believe that data management exists at the core in your data center or in your cloud, but also exists out at the edge. Ravi talked a lot about this. I'm not going to repeat all of his words, but allowing our platform to push your control of data out to the edge. So giving you control of what gets replicated out, what gets synchronized back, what the access and security is of that data that you have elected to push out to the edge. That creates the Couchbase platform. And it's not just about what you're running in your data center, but it's about how you're replicating or synchronizing some or all of that data out to 1, 10, or a million devices, whether those be mobile phones, certainly Android and iPhone devices, but also embedded systems. So if you imagine kiosks sitting in a bank or at an airport, if you imagine an embedded system in your car or in an airplane or on an oil rig, it doesn't have to be a device, but that's the edge, the embedded systems, the embedded computers that are running out there. And this is a quick picture of how we look at that from the platform perspective. So we have kind of 3 products. On the left, the Couchbase Server. That is the data center, scalable, distributed, NoSQL database that runs in your cloud or in your data center, and has key value and query and full text and security and all those replication, high availability, all those concerns. And that connects through a gateway layer out to Couchbase Lite, which is our embedded database. It's a library that you embed into your application. It's not just Couchbase Server shrunk down so it runs on a small footprint, but it's actually a built from the ground up embedded library for Java and .NET and Android and iOS that you, very much like SQLite, you embed into your application. It's a JSON native database, so you don't have the relational schema management to deal with. It also provides full text search and nickel and replication and individual document access all the way out at the edge on the data that it is storing locally. That is useful by itself, right? Having just an embedded database, an embedded JSON database might be applicable and useful, but where the power really comes is the ability to replicate and synchronize back to or just from unidirectionally or bidirectionally to the larger data set sitting in your cloud. So you may be building an order management, order capture system, and you have all your millions and tens of millions of orders stored in one data center in your cloud. each one of your sales reps, each one of your field agents has some of those replicated down to their individual device. I'm not going to go through the details of how that happens. We can talk about channels and access pattern and authorization. We do that, and when we manage that, we can talk about that more later. But replicating small bits of that, and or letting them take orders out at the edge. Maybe they don't have mobile or Wi-Fi access. Those orders get stored to their local device. When they come back to headquarters, when they get back online, that's automatically replicated and synchronized back to the database or to other devices, right? This is not just a device to cloud. It could be device to device. And so you get a lot of power of different topologies, different use cases that you want to create. Not everybody has a mobile or an edge use case. That's fine. Many of you do. Many of you will. And so keeping this in mind, how will I move data out to the edge? How will I get it back from the edge? How will I enable my application to be an offline first application is really what the Couchbase mobile, Couchbase Lite platform is designed for. So just going back 1 second, this is the Couchbase platform, and this is the, oops, I went too fast. And this is the Couchbase platform, right? So the platform is the whole thing, and then it spans the core out to the edge with this gateway layer that manages the data routing and authentication. So I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. I'm not going to talk much more about mobile and server differences from now on. It's going to be mostly on the server, but the concepts apply kind of everywhere when you're managing data. Ravi also talked about our kind of two of our driving philosophies, and really marrying these together is the hardest bit of what we do, and where we believe Couchbase stands out uniquely. The ability to provide flexible data access, flexible schema, flexible querying, while also being able to deploy and operate and scale and upgrade and maintain availability and deal with failures all together. So you find some technologies that are very flexible and friendly to work with when they're on your laptop, but don't work so well when you deploy them to 10, 20, 30 node clusters across 2 clouds and back to your own data center. You find other technologies that do that very, very well, and you can deploy thousands of nodes spread all around globally. But changing the schema and getting different access patterns and providing fast access to the users using that, they don't quite measure up. And we're not here to say that Couchbase is perfect or that it solves every problem anyone ever had, but we believe that for the right use cases, what we have designed Couchbase for, it's really, really good at that. So I was gonna go through each one of these individually. I'm not going to, but we talk about on the developing side, data models, flexible access, multiple query and indexing capabilities, and on the operations side, we talk about simplified management, easy scalability, high performance, disaster recovery, high availability, all of those things coming together. Okay. So I'm going to go through each of those in a little bit more depth. That's why I didn't read all of the bullet points there, but we'll start with the development side of things. We talk a lot about this JSON as a flexible schema. There is, in some worlds, especially some NoSQL technologies, talk a lot about denormalization of your data. You have to denormalize everything because that's how it works. And yeah, that helps, but it leads to explosion of data, duplication of data, which then leads to consistency challenges and data storage issues. And we have the ability, and there are times where it makes sense to denormalize data, right? If we take this example here on the bottom, in a relational world, you're going to have a very, very simple relational world, have 3 different tables, all very normalized. And in a Couchbase, or really any JSON world, you would combine those because it makes sense to combine your name and your skills and your company name and your experience and maybe your address and your email address. Makes sense to get all that together, and that's a lot of what Ravi talked about. That is a unit that is the object that maps into your application. But if we take this one step further, if I'm storing my company name here of Javier's company name, and I had thousands of employees in here, I could put the company name here, but I wouldn't put their mailing address. right? Because if I did that in every single user profile document, when I wanted to change that mailing address, I'd have to go and update it in every single place, right? And I deal with inconsistency, and I've duplicated the data, and that's just a very small example, but you all know how that can explode. So this is where Couchbase's kind of hybrid normalization and denormalization approach happens, where I will denormalize this information because it makes sense to keep it all together. I can, and we'll see in a minute, join to another set of documents that are my company information. And so the company, this company, AppMax, their address, their details are stored in one place and linked and related to this other document. So it's this hybrid normalization and denormalization approach of data modeling that helps set Couchbase apart. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more later on. And then also, we'll go through this more, but we have a variety of access patterns. And I'm going to go through them each, but there is kind of direct key value that we talk about as a primary index lookup if you know the record that you're going to get. There is structured query, where you want to get either a list of records or find a particular record based upon some secondary criteria. That's SQL. That's your structured query language. And then there's the full text search, which is if I want to find a record or a list of records based upon some free-form text or based upon some part of a free-form text. You wouldn't use SQL to do a %like% query at scale, right? And so that's where full text comes in, by being able to interpret and understand free-form text and pieces of text, pieces of the words. And then also our kind of newly introduced analytics, which is based on an MPP distributed query architecture for doing unindexed queries. So mostly around ad hoc queries of reasonably large data sets that would take too long to do a full table scan otherwise. And this particular service, I'll talk about it a little more, and that's what Scott mentioned about analytics, is designed to do that so that you don't put additional pressure or take too long doing that in access patterns that it's not designed for. So these are tools that you have as a developer. These are tools in your tool belt when working with data in Couchbase, and you've got to take a little bit of education to figure out which tool is right for what I'm trying to build in the application, and that's what we're here to help, right? Our documentation, our blogs, these conferences, our phone calls, and whatever, we're here to help you. So I'm going to go through each one of those in a little bit more detail, just to give you a flavor of what it all means and looks like, and then we'll hop over to the operations side. And I'm going to be running out of time very soon. So Nickel is our query language. Ravi talked about it. It is SQL for JSON. It should look very much like SQL. You have select, star, from, users, where. That's a Nickel query. That's also a SQL query. You have the same thing, the same update, delete, and insert abilities within Nickel. We also very uniquely have a join syntax in Nickel. And there's a couple different kinds of joins that you can do. I'm not going to go through all of them. But this is what I was talking about earlier, is taking a very denormalized customer record and joining it with multiple, in this case, order or purchase order records, where it wouldn't make sense to embed every single purchase order in a growing customer document. But Couchbase with Nickel allows you to join those together so that an application can make a single query, select the email address and the count from this table and from this table, ignore line 4 for a moment, and then group by the email address. And that's a very standard SQL query, and you can do the same in Couchbase. Coming back, this on keys is unique to Nickel and is one type of join, one of our older types of join that we provide. In the next version, 5.5, you can still use this, but we'll also have removed that so that you can join on any two fields within, or any fields within the JSON structure. Full text search, as I alluded to earlier, is really about finding relevance-based and score-based matches on some sub elements of your text. And so it's an inverted index, it has term matching and scoring, and can give you a context snippet, a contextual picture of where the match was found within the document. So it's very typically used for search, right? And the vast majority of use cases around that are find me something based upon these factors, and I want the most relevant search. Not necessarily even the closest match, but I want the most relevant search, like a Google search. And we do that through inverted indexes and being language aware with stemming, and then scoring those results in the output to you. And both Nickel and full text provide different capabilities, but they both come together within the Couchbase platform, and they both are part of our API and the SDK that you have. Okay, let me go through this a little bit more quickly now. Talking about analytics, analytics is really about removing ETL, so where you would otherwise have extracted all of the data from Couchbase and put it into SQL Server or MySQL or Redshift or something. Being able to do those analytic queries on the data that's already in Couchbase makes for much faster time to insight. This is as a beta in our 5.5 release, and so will be GA in our 6.0 towards the end of this year. I'm not going to cover all of this, but analytics between queries is really about hybrid transactional and analytic processing. Be able to run high indexing, and also to be able to run analytics, usually unindexed, fairly longer running in the hundreds of milliseconds or seconds, or even tens of seconds of analytical queries without impacting one or the other. And the last thing that we're adding in 5.5 that I talked about, or that Scott talked about, is this eventing service. And this is about triggers, and this is about notifications, and this is about responding when something changes in Couchbase, for that change to be to trigger a function. And you write the function in JavaScript, and you tell it what to do. And a very simple view of this is you have both on update, so when the data is added or changed, and on delete, so separate, the ability to handle those two actions separately. And it's basically JavaScript function. It's the V8 JavaScript engine, so you have the ability to query against Couchbase, you have the ability to update data in Couchbase, you have the ability to call out right now via a curl call, but we'll be adding different integrations, or you have the ability just to log that something happened. And so this can be used for a whole range of things, but it's kind of our first foray into user-defined functions and triggers and all of that. Okay. With a few minutes left, I'll be able to get through some of this. I'm going to skip this one. From a deployment perspective, services exist within a cluster. And a cluster is a set of one or more nodes running one or more services. And those services interact with each other. And those services are how we provide the different patterns, either query or full or analytics. Within a cluster, they all operate together, and then your application has a single cluster object that it uses to say, hey, I want to run this Nickel query, or I want to get this document directly, or I want to run this full text query. And all of that, all of the topology management under the covers is done through our integration with the client library and the cluster itself. So you don't have to worry about how many nodes there are. You don't have to worry about node is being added or removed. You don't have to worry about whether you have one node or 3 nodes or 20. The application takes care of all of that, and it's all transparent to you. I apologize I'm going through this so quickly. As I said, it's like 3 days or 8 years of material in 30 minutes. But these slides will be available afterwards, and certainly we can talk to you in more depth. Everything has replicas built in. So again, we manage the high availability within a cluster. So a single cluster is meant to sit within a LAN or within your virtual network. And then we we replicate clusters globally. So each individual data center or each individual cloud region is its own cluster that can be of any size and replicates either unidirectionally or bidirectionally. Amongst them, each cluster is managed separately, has its own high availability built in, and your application accesses those local clusters wherever it is geographically. So in some cases, you might choose to have active-active, where all of your US users are accessing your US data center, all of your Europe users are accessing your European one, and all of your Asian customers are accessing the Asian data center. Or you might choose to have everything routed to one with the others as hot standbys. And that's really your decision about how your application is architected and what works best. And then we'll talk a little bit about security. Security is a critically important part of a database in general, of managing a database, and certainly for Couchbase storing in some cases very sensitive and personally identifiable information. We are no strangers to security, and certainly the new requirements of GDPR are not that new to us, right? We've been dealing with PCI and HIPAA in the US. We've been dealing with different government regulations. So when GDPR came around, we took a look at everything and said, yeah, we should probably add some feature over there to make that bit a little bit easier, but the general capability, the general awareness of securely storing data and giving you secure access to it has been a part of Couchbase from the beginning. So we talk a lot about end-to-end security, encryption out on the device, encryption down up in the data center, encryption over the wire, authentication and authorization at all layers of access pattern, filtered replication to be able to take some data out of a cluster but not all of it. There's a lot of areas of security, and it's a constantly evolving topic. So we're constantly adding new features like X509 certificate-based authentication, like different roles for role access control, and that's a roadmap of ours that will continue to grow based upon your requirements and your expectations, but we certainly have a very robust story today. Okay, with the last few minutes, I'm just going to touch on some kind of reference architectures of getting started with Couchbase. We see a lot of customers, and I talk to a lot of organizations asking, I've got my systems running already. I see the promise that you're telling me, but how do I get started with Couchbase? And really, one of the most common patterns that we see is starting off with Couchbase as a caching layer. And it doesn't mean that Couchbase is only a cache, and it doesn't mean that Couchbase has to stay a caching layer. But when you compare, especially to other NoSQL databases, Couchbase's ability to be a caching layer, a lot of C's in that, Couchbase's ability to be a caching layer is a very strong capability to start off with, where you don't have to rip and replace your existing system. You don't have to move the data or extract it from others, but you can get real benefit in terms of performance and access flexibility by just starting as a caching layer. And then you slowly move more data, more access pattern into Couchbase, and you start to see, well, some of this data doesn't need to live in my relational database, and so now I can make Couchbase the system of record, the source of truth. We have customers that exist like this for years. We have customers that only plan to exist like this for some of their applications, and we have customers that start off completely greenfield with Couchbase as their system of record. So it really depends on what makes the most sense to you to get the most benefit out of Couchbase as quickly and early as possible. Once you've cached your data, you can replicate it globally. And so with Couchbase, we make it very easy to add on global replication after the fact. It doesn't have to be something that you architect for from the beginning. So you can start off with just 3 nodes in your New York data center, and that's serving your application. And then as your application grows, as you expand to other regions, you can add on a London data center with 3 nodes, or maybe 5, or maybe 2, whatever makes sense to you, and start running your application over there. And then you can add on an Asian one, and you can add on a South African one, you can add on an Australian one, all very flexibly without taking your application down, just by creating these links between the clusters that are already running. Getting a little bit more complex, we start to look at how Couchbase operates in a Lambda or a streaming architecture. And so we have great integrations with both Kafka and Spark, depending on what you're trying to do with the data. But taking it in from other sources, be those other databases or applications or human input, feeding that through Kafka and or into Spark, feeding that out to other databases, other data sources, feeding that into Couchbase. I could draw a line that goes all the way back again from Couchbase back into to Kafka. There's all sorts of topologies that you can put together. But this is a very common approach that we see of pulling in silos of different data and storing some or all of that, or even temporarily storing it in Couchbase so that you can provide an application on top of it, a new service to access the data. Again, without ripping and replacing what you already have, but getting the capability that we provide, be that performance or geographic replication or the structured query or the full text or all together. And then finally, when we start to think about how would I push that data out to the edge, you can take those same architectures that you started with very small as you grew and replicated, as you added new streams, and start to push some or all of that data out to newly created mobile applications. And so you still have data coming in and being served from your web app and other databases. You can insert that directly into the replication stream, or it can come in through the top to Couchbase server and then replicate out to these devices or these embedded applications. One point about this, because it's an embedded database, we're not forcing you to put all of your data through Couchbase Lite just to start using it. You can have your application as it currently sits using REST services and being an always-on application. Load up Couchbase, start storing just a very little bit of data in there as everything continues the way it did before, and migrate over as you in that hybrid approach as you become more and more comfortable, as more data makes sense without taking the application down, without re-architecting your data model, without affecting the performance or the architecture. So I think I'm on time or over by a minute or two. Just very quickly as an introduction, I know I went through everything very, very quickly, and I hope you absorbed like 3 or 4% of it. If you got 10%, that would be really a great thing for me. But from a next steps perspective, there's a lot of content on the web. I would strongly promote our free online training, mostly because I helped develop it, but also because it's pretty good. It's very easy to consume, small videos, self-paced. It's good for anybody to get a quick introduction to what NoSQL is, what Couchbase is, how it's architected, how do I develop with it, how do I build an application, how do I build a mobile application. It takes you through all of that depending on what your interest is. So I would strongly encourage anybody to go and have a look and pick up some or all of that training. And then we're here to help, right? We're here at these conferences. We have a team in London. We have a team in France. We have a team in Germany. We have a team in the Nordics, in Sweden and Norway. We have the US guys. We have teams out in Asia. So we try to be very accessible. We try to be able to answer your questions, able to help you at whatever stage you're at. If you have introductory questions, if you're having a challenge getting something to work right, if you're already in production, whatever it is, I really encourage you to come and ask us and talk to us, and it'll give us the opportunity to make sure you have the best experience. And if you're not having a good experience, that's an area where we can improve. And so it's really this cyclical feedback. Thank you all.
Thank you, Perry.